All right. Good evening, everyone. I want to first of all take the opportunity to thank you for attending this evening's event. My name is Molly, and I work in the Office of Alumni Relations. I help to coordinate this month's program. So I truly appreciate you taking the time out of your night to join us and cover the material that you went over and also have a chance to interact with our faculty expert who's on hand tonight, Connie Emerson. Connie Emerson is a assistant teaching professor in the Master of Science program in project management here at Northeastern. Just a quick reminder, if you have any questions throughout tonight's session, please utilize the chat box on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, and we'll work to address them in the order that they are asked. Without further delay, I do want to hand things off to Connie to get things started for the night.
Great. Hey, Molly, thanks so much, and welcome everybody. It's great to have time to spend with you this evening. I do have a prepared presentation and am really excited and glad and looking forward to going over that with you. But I wanted to start off first to see, just in general, are there questions that you might have around project management, around the content that you've had the opportunity to explore over the last 3 weeks? And that may help me know how to better frame the conversation that we'll have over the next 30 minutes or so. And I'm hoping everyone is hearing me. Great, thanks, Molly. Thanks. Okay, well, I'm not seeing any questions come through, and maybe someone is frantically typing. And so let me talk, and Jovan and Molly are going to help me out. If questions come in and I don't see them, they're going to jump right in and ask me to stop and take a look at that question. So I spent time reflecting on the content that you've had the chance to go through, and wanted to spend some time taking a look at how those concepts all do come together. So first, welcome, and I do want to talk about our 3 key topics: scope, risk, and quality, and how they all work together. So this is some research from the Standish Group, and it actually is read, the most current years are all the way to the left, so it looks a little different than what we might initially think. And I think in general, first, I want to think about how good our projects. And so to me, the trends are things are going in the right direction, that our number of successful projects are going up, our number of failed projects are going down. And that's pretty important given the complexity that we work in. And those challenge projects are still moving up and down. And I think that's important. We are pushed all the time around the projects that we are being asked to do. And our focus really as project management practitioners is on good projects. And why good projects are important. Let me get back to where I need to be. Would you agree that completing projects well works to satisfy the need for which it was undertaken? We know this. All projects arise in response to a need. Someone somewhere has a need, and that kicks off the whole project life cycle. And projects really are the investments that organizations make in order to deliver the products and services that they are responsible for. So let me then ask you, and this is where you could type right into your chat box, why it's hard to deliver good projects. What are some of the challenges that you face on the projects that you are leading, that you are involved in? And if you want to just chat some ideas in that chat box, I'd like to build on those as we go through this conversation. Communicating is a big one, and definitely we have different stakeholders, so competing goals are something that we run into there. Anyone else, some other ideas? Roles and responsibilities and clarity on that. Expectations. I just want to get these down so I have them to look at. Priorities. Thanks, Jovan. Anyone else? So listen, your ideas are relevant, and they do connect to research that really has taken a look at what gets in the way of projects being successful. So one thing is around a scope that is out of control. We agree on what we're going to deliver and people keep asking for more and we just do it without really looking at the impact of that. And Molly, your point around communication. We talked about resources, roles and responsibilities, so not having enough and then coordinating them. And then around expectations, poorly defined requirements. Other things that get in the way are those false expectations, no risk management, and then someone also talked about priorities, so poorly defined goals and deliverables, and not getting the right people involved. And so again, a number of things that can get in the way of projects being successful. So here is the good news. Project management is here to help. And so this is from the pulse of the profession from the Project Management Institute. They do a study every year. And this year they spent time looking at projects and success. And so the good news is that we are wasting less money. And we saw on the earlier slide that our number of successful projects are going up. Now, here's what's really important, and it goes back to what you talked around expectations. So many times we've talked about projects working to that triple constraint, working to deliver to scope, schedule, and budget, and that is no longer enough. That it really is about achieving their benefits, managing the expectations, making sure the right priorities are set along the way. And so, what it says to me, though, and the reason that the findings are showing that good project management, good program management, and good portfolio management really do support projects being successful. So for the first time in 5 years, more projects are starting to meet their original goals and their business intent, and within budget. For me, though, it's not just about project management, it's about the right project management. And we know the body of knowledge of project management is big, so how do we make sure that we're using that right project management? So over the past 3 weeks, you had the chance to review some snippets of project management. One was around project scope and work breakdown structures. So really starting to work around expectations and priorities, and then setting ourselves up to deal with not only communication, but roles and responsibilities. You also had the chance to follow along with one of my favorite topics in project risk management because, well, we don't have a crystal ball and projects are done with a lot of uncertainty, and how do we best prepare ourselves to address that? And also you had time to listen to some conversations around quality, knowing what the constraints are that you face in your project, how you can address that, and then continuously improve through the life of the project. Now, the other thing that I wanted to say as you took a look at those weeks is we gave you not only information around the target conversation, but we threw some other stuff in there as well, around budgeting and global project management and tracking results around earned value. We took a look at negotiating, we took a look at communication, and then how assigning people to too much work really gets in the way of the project being successful. So we did cover a lot of territory, and that was really purposeful to start to demonstrate the breadth and depth of what project management is all about. So there was a method to our madness. To step back and put some structure around it, the body of knowledge of project management talks about a number of practices that we can use, tools, techniques, processes, approaches to support you in the delivery of your project and in the delivery of that successful project. So to talk about some of your challenge, Molly, there's communication management, scope management, and stakeholder management start to get at setting expectations and priorities. Also, taking a look at roles and responsibilities, scope management, and then the budget management starts to look about that. So there are a number of areas that start to address that to support you in delivering your project successfully. And then from a project management perspective, we can lay these different knowledge areas over the project management process, where we work to initiate a project, and that's where we're working to set expectations to resolve competing priorities, whether it's at the phase level or at the project level, and then working to plan that project. So to start to address roles, competing roles and responsibilities, how we're going to communicate through that project. And then we'll work through executing. I don't know why we call that executing. It sounds like we're shooting the project, but we're working to do it. And while we're initiating, planning, executing, as a project manager, we are monitoring and controlling that project until we get to the end, to that conclusion. So we're applying project management in a value-added way across these process groups. So what to use when is the real question, and I'm going to come back to that question in just a minute. So around managing expectations, I see Irvin, that question coming in. Hang on just a second, and we'll start to talk about some ways to address that. So for me, when I take a look at the projects that you run, we really need to be insightful about the project management that we use, because, well, the body of knowledge of project management is just huge. So it's really all about recognizing that we can't use it all at any one time. It's not really smart to use it all at any one time. So how do we prioritize it? And so for you, it's about looking at your project and understanding its success criteria, making sure that success criteria is prioritized. So what's the most important thing about that project, and the second and the third? And then based on that success criteria and the goal that you're working to meet, what can get in the way? And then how can you use project management out to help you with what can get in the way, whether it's around your project approaches, your practices, your tools, and then developing them into your leadership of what that project is all about. So moving into our conversation today, we are generally pushed to deliver our projects better, faster, cheaper, with resources that we don't own. Our processes and technology are changing, and there's a lot of complexity in our project around human behavior, around systems behavior, around ambiguity. And so what we really want to use is to leverage project management and its best practices to support us. And that's what I want to talk about for the next few minutes. So before I get into managing expectations, our key topics were around risk. That was my topic, so you can see I got the biggest cog in the wheel there. Charters and work breakdown structures, and quality tools. And I know it's kind of silly, but do you ever talk to your friends about if you could only eat one food, what it would be for the rest of your life? I would pick potatoes, because you can do so many things with potatoes. So someone once asked me, if I could only use one project management practice for the rest of my life, what would it be? And so Joe, Stephen, and I were having that conversation. And I decided project risk management, because projects are filled with uncertainty, and that really understanding what can get in the way of success, what maybe might perhaps happen, and being able to address that is value added. Well, Stephen said, look, unless you have direction, then what do you even know that you're doing? So he thought charters would be the way to go. And I responded to Stephen, well, hey, I could identify as a risk that there may not be a project charter and then develop it as part of my risk response. So like rock, paper, scissors, I thought I got him there. And Joe was all about quality, because he said, unless we build a solution that meets the needs, then we might as well just take the elevator to the top of the building and throw all of that money off to the people in the streets. And I thought he had a good point there. I think what we were all saying is that all of the knowledge areas of project management really contribute, that they connect. What's really critical to you as a project manager, that you pick and employ those pieces that add value. So as a project manager, that you understand what each practice, what each tool is and isn't, and how to apply it. And that's what our Masters in Project Management is all about. Not just understanding the theory and the concepts, but real world application to all of that as well. So what I do want to talk about for the next few minutes, project charters and work breakdown structures. I want to continue the conversation on risk registers, and then setting your project up through the success through the use of continuous improvement, and how all these pieces connect together. So here's the charter, and Irvin, this is where I really start to manage expectations. I don't know if you guys can see this slide, but it is a sample that comes right out of the project management body of knowledge, or the PMBOK as we call it. And so here's where we are working to set direction for what the project is all about. That we're working to understand, where did this project come from? Why are we doing it anyway? And what is the target or targets of this project through the objective? So that's really starting to get at the purpose, the vision, the scope of what this project is all about. That we may start to set some expectations around how long it might take to do this project, what the budget might be. And I would remind you, this is a very rough estimate and schedule at this point. that we know what our approval requirements are, who is responsible for approving, so that when we start to understand what the direction is, that we can then have conversations around that, and then an approval here. So what we get from this project charter, particularly for internal projects, it's a contract. It's a contract for what the project is all about, so that we're working to get stakeholder buy-in right from the very beginning. And we should get approval on this charter before we move further into the project. If we think back to that life cycle earlier, initiate is where the project charter is created. So before we move into planning, it's really about making sure that we at the 50,000 foot level have the same view of what this project is all about. So well thought out charter is going to help work through your expectations and what your priorities are all about. Many times this is based on a business case, or in fact, in some projects, the business case may become part of what your charter is all about. Anyone questions there on the charter before I move on? Again, it's giving us that single point of reference, working to manage stakeholder. Yes, Yolanda, you're right. It may take several rounds before alignment. And I find many times we are coming together, we're sharing what we have. There's going to be some information that we don't have. We're going to have to run around, get some answers to questions, have more conversations, and come back again. Irvin, how thorough is the charter? Again, it's a very high level document at probably the 50,000 foot level, working to really summarize what we believe the scope of the project to be. And that's why Yolanda's point is really important, that we're trying to get the right heads involved. Because when we start a project, there's a lot of information, but as the program or project manager, we may not have it all. It exists just in other heads, and it's making sure that we're getting all of that information so that we can move forward with what that project is all about. I'm not saying this document looks pretty simple. I'm not trying to say that this is easy to do at all. It is a lot of conversations and a best practice in project management to make sure that we have a buy-in and commitment to this charter before we move forward. Because if we don't, what it's really saying is someone doesn't agree yet, and we want to make sure that everyone is agreeing there. Another tool that we can use to support us in expectations, to support us in communication, and also around roles and responsibilities is taking this 50,000 foot view of the charter, and Dr. Ono talked about this in his one of his talks, is about the work breakdown structure. So taking your project and breaking it into big chunks of work. Maybe those are phases. And as an example, I picked an analysis phase of a project. And then looking at what deliverables are going to come out of that phase. And maybe one of the deliverables coming out of the analysis phase are my requirements. And then at some point breaking that down into activities. So the verb noun combination. So maybe in fact, to come up with the requirements as a team, we identify activities that we need to do, conduct interviews, review documentation, draft requirements, review requirements, and then have an approval of what those requirements are about. So now what I'm working to do is set expectations around scope. I'm working to clarify roles and responsibilities because now, well, as a team, we should be able to start to identify who is doing what and get agreement and commitment to that before we move on in the project. Work breakdown structure is a great communication tool because if as a project we have a work breakdown structure, we're now all calling the same things the same name. So this can help us then communicate as we're moving through that project. So that's really the summary that I wanted to do for the week 1 lectures that Stephen Ono presented. And I don't know, Irvin, if I've answered your questions yet, but does anyone else have questions before we move on? Everyone good? So risk. Well, we start looking for risk really early in the project during initiation, during the time of chartering, in fact. What risks exist in the project? What maybe might perhaps happen next week, next month, next year in that project that would get in the way of it being successful? And we want to start at the charter level so that we're, again, setting expectations. We're letting people know where our potential weak links are in the project. And those risks may help us determine if we even move forward with that project or not, or how we move forward with that project. So the important thing to talk about with a risk is it's a future event. It may or may not happen. If something's already happened, it's not a risk, it's an issue, it's a change, it's an action item. So I find that the work breakdown structure is a great tool to help us as a team find our risks. And we may pop back to the work breakdown structure once we come up with our risk response plan to add work in to proactively address that. So quality and scope can certainly help identify our risks. They can help prioritize our risks and become integral to the responses as well. And so it really gives us the chance to think out of the box. What could just stop our project in its tracks? And to really analyze and figure out how big of a problem it is and what we're going to work to deal with it. And I know we could come up with a generic list of risks that could happen on just about any project that any of you are working on. But I really encourage the team to think through what would be unusual, unique, that could stop this project. A number of clients that I work with are always pushing me to push on their teams to be very mindful about risk, to really think and give it some good thought about what that might be. And we can find hundreds of risks on any project. We can't address them all, and that's what risk analysis is all about. Yolanda's reminding me that we definitely have risks, issues, decisions, and actions that happen, and that all four of those are components, they're elements that we as project managers need to manage. And so a risk may become an issue if it occurs, or it may make a decision happen, or an action that needs to be taken care of. So a lot of connection between that acronym RAID. Again, we can find lots of risks. We need to analyze those. And so we could do it on a very qualitative nature, which I work with many projects and we do it this way, a matter of defining measures of probability, how likely is the event to happen, and then what is the impact if it does happen. It's critical to work to understand guidelines for assessing probability. I just use low, medium, high here, but behind this there would be definitions for those so that we have consistency in how we're working to do it. Because again, we can't address every risk. Part of our risk planning work is to figure out what level of risk do we need to address so that we know if we need to do something about it or not. We may go right from qualitative analysis into our risk response planning, coming up with that risk action, or we may do more analysis on it. And there are a number of quantitative analysis tools that we can use to put more objective criteria around those risks. But regardless, as we move from risk identification, we need to analyze those risks so that we can then move into risk response planning. And this is where we're figuring out what we want to do with the risk. I should have told you I'm a project management geek, and I really do this level of analysis in my risk work. So that from that analysis, we're going to decide if an action is required or not. And then if an action is required, we're going to figure out, do we want to be proactive about it, or can we just be reactive? So if it happens, then here's what we'll do. And really to detail out that response. We want to make sure that our risk work is alive and integrated with the rest of our plan. So how's that going to happen? I also think it's important to look at the cost of the risk because, well, what if the event happens, it costs less to fix it than to be proactive around it. So at that point, I'm just going to let it happen. Also, you want to make sure that your risk work is value added. So I'm going to reassess the work based on my response plan. Where is it now? And if I haven't moved it, then I haven't done enough risk work. We may also want to back a plan B. So if the risk happens, now what? And if you haven't had enough risk work yet, what are the risks in your risk responses? So sometimes the actions that we take to address a risk can add even more risk to the project. So we want to be aware of that so that we're not picking responses that are going to create more issues for us and what we might need to do there. So again, we're working through our risk work to communicate so people aren't surprised. Maybe you're surprised when you start thinking about these risks, but we don't want people to be surprised. It can help us around priorities because we can start to see where risk could start to influence what our schedule is, what our budget is for our project. And it's another good way to clarify roles and responsibilities. As the project manager, you may not want to be responsible for all of those risks, that you're going to allow team members to be owners there. And again, we're setting expectations that there's a lot that could get in the way of our project being successful. But we want to communicate these so that when they do happen, as I mentioned, people are not surprised. And then the quality piece. One of my managers once told me this: no one will ever remember how quickly a project was delivered. They're going to remember how well it worked when they got their hands on it. And that's why quality work is so important. And I know we're driven for dates, we're driven for budgets, but we can't forget about quality. Or as Joe said, just go to the top of the building and throw the money off because people aren't going to use it if it doesn't meet the need that this project was created for. So that from a quality perspective, we take a look at what are the quality measures for our project so that we can plan them in, take actions to assure them, and then check and see what we have to do to control. So it goes back to with Joe's point around continuous improvement in the theory of constraints, is to know what your constraints are that could be getting in the way of quality and what can you do about it from a planning, assurance, and control perspective. And when you figure that out, then what's the next biggest problem and the next? In addressing quality, we want to be aware of our marginal analysis and at what point does quality work stop adding value? Because we could go on forever and ever, and we want to stop at that point in time. Just a reminder that quality is one of the 10 knowledge areas in the project management body of knowledge, and that we want to look at not only product quality, but project management quality as well. And it goes back to things like setting expectations, making sure communication is clear, making sure your team members know who is doing what. So all of those pieces as well, around scope, around work breakdown structures, around risks, and it really drives to the purpose of continuous improvement. What's limiting your project and how do you address it? And then what's the next limiting factor and how do you address that? And so in this whole idea of quality, it's really analyzing your project management approach, improving it, what you can do differently, more of instead of. And so for me, that's really what project management is all about, is value-added applications. So for tonight, I'd ask you to think about the challenge that you noted, whether you shared it or not. And what is one takeaway from our conversation that can help you manage that challenge? I am not suspecting that any one thing will help with one challenge, but then what's left over and your next steps to address that. Project management is continuously improved through your career and through the life of your project. So that's the end of what I wanted to say, and I'm just about at 30 minutes. And so let me ask you what questions you have, unless Molly or Jovan, you want to jump in and take over here.
Hi, Connie, it's Molly. I don't want to take over, but I did find one comment earlier helpful. I think that Victoria had about how to communicate your needs to management, especially when they may not necessarily listen, or maybe they're set with the original plan. What is some advice that you have for communicating changes that you need maybe to your direct supervisor or even a level above that?
Well, I think it's important, and that goes back to the level of maturity that your organization is at in project management. So an organization that is embracing more of it, it's going to be easier to have that conversation that the management team has stepped in there. But I do sometimes run into situations where it isn't as easy to have that conversation. And honestly, my best friend becomes my risk plan at that point. I start to try to communicate in what could go wrong in the project, what is the probability and impact, how big of a problem it is, and then what we would be prepared to do around that. I know that's not the answer, but at least it's a first step. But of course, I do try to work through the process of the charter to see if that's going to help out. But I need to let folks know what the challenges of that are. A well laid out work breakdown structure with an estimate and a schedule can also help as well. It's kind of like you stop at the grocery store on your way home from work and you just run in to get a couple of things and you come out with 2 plastic bags filled and you just spent $100 and you think, oh my gosh, what did I just spend that on? And so and you look at the receipt and yeah, those are the things you bought and that's how much it was. So it's really finding a way to best communicate in the language that those folks can understand. I find sometimes risks are a good place to start there. I don't know if that helps at all, Molly, but that might be just a couple of thoughts.
That was definitely helpful. Thank you. And I think Victoria also saw that helpful. And then I know we have 2 comments on the side chat from Yolanda about governance and steering committee. I don't know if Yolanda, you want to elaborate on those comments a little bit more. Connie, if you know what she may be referring to.
No, those are two really excellent topics. If Yolanda, if you could just give me a little more to go on, I'd be happy to chat there. Oh, yes, exactly. If all of that's in place, it can help with escalations. And, you know, that's a really great point. When you have a communications management plan, one section of that could be your issue escalation, or if it's not there, just having the governance, issue escalation, change management, risk escalation. All of those things are really important because you're setting them up during initiate when everyone is getting used to how we're going to work through this project. And so then when all of a sudden Molly and I run into an issue and we try to work it out and we can't, we just know we have to escalate it, that the project is stuck. It doesn't mean we're still not going to have lunch together and we're good friends on the team, but it gives us a process, a governance process. So I think that's a great point. It definitely helps. When is a good time, this is from Nahi, when is a good time to communicate future uncertainties with the team? You know, I do that at the very beginning. My best sources of risk are the team. As a project manager, I'm not always in the detail that they are. I don't know what they're worried about, what they're concerned about. And I find by getting the team involved at the beginning helps them. They get it off their shoulders. Maybe there's something they're really worried about and they think they're the only one that's worried about that. And so by getting them together to look at what those risks are, now they know they've been heard. Now the weight of all of that is not on their shoulder. We may not be able to make the risk go away, but we at least need to try. I mean, you can't control the weather on the day of your picnic, right? But you at least need to know what you're going to do if it does become a problem. And so that transparency, from my perspective, is really important to have right from the very beginning. And I don't mean whining, I mean very objective conversations about what's going on. You've got to be careful to not let a risk turn into, you want to look at it from a perspective of what could go wrong so that we can be prepared to deal with it. You're welcome. Sorry.
So I think we can maybe give people a little more time here to think about additional questions that they have. I do want to pop in quickly and just talk about the enrollment management for the project management program. If anybody has specific questions about that, we will include the appropriate contact for the program in the post-event survey email that you'll get. His name's Jared Pierce, and he's the Senior Assistant Director for Enrollment Services. So just note that you don't need to write his name down, but if for whatever reason, you know, you're thinking over the next few days that you do want to get some more information on a full program here at Northeastern, you'll definitely have the opportunity to do so. So if you guys are all set and you want to give a little quick type in the chat box that you don't have any more questions, just so we know that you're listening, that would be helpful. And then I can pass things off to Connie to close. And then, you know, obviously she's available if you guys have questions in the future, but I'll give people a few more minutes and then let her close if needed.
The example of the WBS, I don't have one here with me this evening. And I can follow up, Molly or Javon, with you to see what we might want to do with that.
Yep, we can try to see what materials maybe we can get from Stephen or hard copy docs that we have, and then we can provide that to you personally via email. LLW, I know I have your name earlier in here, but we can send that to you via email. No problem.
Do you see Victoria's question, if she wanted to put this?
Yep, Victoria, we can send you a hard copy in the mail, a certificate of completion. If you want it, we've been doing that upon request. And then you can kind of mirror that language and then the learning objectives that are listed on the website if you would like. And then if anybody else obviously wants a certificate of completion, all you have to do is email me. And then I see obviously some of you are noting in here that you do want that. So we can definitely mail that hard copy, no problem. And then you can have it and use it as you wish in the future. But I mean, again, congrats to you guys for kind of completing the last 3 weeks. Irvin, my email will be in the post-event survey, so no need to write it down now. You'll get all of our contact information after. And then Victoria, I think we should have your updated mailing address, but if you want to send it via email just to confirm in case you've moved, that would be awesome. Awesome, you guys love a good certificate. They look great, so you should be very excited. They're foil outlined, so they're beautiful. Awesome, guys, thank you. All right, I think if there's nothing else, I think we can go ahead and wrap things up. If you want a refresher on any of this information, it will be archived on our website and our YouTube page, so you can always go back to it. And then Connie, if you don't have anything else, I think we can go ahead and log out shortly.
Okay, great. I'll just hang in for a second.
Cool.
And in case anyone does have questions. And thank you everyone for spending some time with Joe, Stephen, and I. We all love project management, and so we're excited to share that with you. And thanks for your time this evening.